we had, I guess, another 60 minutes, we could have solved the world's problems when it comes to data. So luckily, we didn't have those 60 minutes. I think what I learned from all the discussion was that ultimately it's about us as a group promoting discussion across other groups, connecting them together. Like Building Smart International is one good example. But I think one of the suggestions made in the comments during our discussion was, why isn't NICA, SmackNow, MCA, and other players here discussing? Because each one, if they're going to be developing data and data standards for their subdomain, there are clear interconnects and clear maps that we need to draw. On LinkedIn, I put a post that talked about moving our industry, moving from islands of automation to what I call islands of data standards and schemas. And this was sort of in relation to digital twins. I think we all agree there are various definitions of digital twins. The definition that we adopt right now within our organization is one that comes from the Digital Twin Consortium, DTC. When we were preparing for our members information on digital twins, we really came across this idea from the early 1990s or late 1990s, where people talked about lack of data interoperability leading to islands of automation. And we all know that by studies done on lack of interoperability and the losses that we incur as a sector due to that has been discussed quite a bit. But what's happening lately is that with every subdomain, we are now producing standards, and RICS actually is an international standards body. We produce standards that are primarily to do with cost management, cost classification, construction information classification. And more or less, we're doing these in our own silos. Thereby, what's happening now is there are many, many standards out there. And one of my colleagues, Dan Hughes in the UK, prepared a map, which you see on the right, with all possible data standards and schemas over the life cycle of an asset. And you will notice that there are many schemas. So really what we are now creating is an island of data standards and schemas. And that's pretty harmful for the vision of digital twins, because digital twins rely on the concept of golden thread or digital thread, and data becomes very central to that idea. So if the data that we have does not connect well with classification systems and other existing domain-specific data standards and schemas, we're going to have a huge issues as we travel on this new journey from BIM over to digital twins. So having seeded this on LinkedIn, it got some impressions, and many folks commented, including Mark, talking about the role and importance of data in digital twins, and thereby the role and importance of the data standards and schemas associated with our sector. So that's my story. What I want to do is utilize this as a backdrop to our discussion. So I'm going to request each one of our experts to come on one by one, try and use as little time as possible, and go through their slides, and then we want to really generate questions, comments, suggestions, disagreements, and hopefully a healthy conversation following the presentation. So I'm going to request Mark, please, if you could begin, let me know when to move your slides forward just to keep things moving?
Very good. And I'll keep off. Hopefully, the bandwidth is a little bit better. I just changed something. So, yeah, go ahead. As I introduced myself, I'm at Esri, very active in a number of organization NIBs, as well as Building Smart and now OGC as well. So the DTIS, Digital Twin Integration Subcommittee, is a subcommittee of the National BIM Standards effort, which is part of NIBs. Our purpose is to, like I said in my introduction, define that relationship between digital twins and BIM as defined by the National BIM Program. As you may know, the National BIM Program is the BIM standard in the US for government, quasi-government, and other organizations are seeking a starting point for BIM standards very often. So our purpose is to develop a white paper, position paper, some communication documents so that we can have a starting point for where we understand BIM serves the purpose of digital twins, where it may not need to, and how BIM can be executed most effectively towards the goals, the use cases of digital twins. We will propose sub-projects and activities, develop tools if needed, develop guidelines after we put together our initial positioning papers. And I know that a few folks on this call are actually involved in that subcommittee as well. We are not making things up here. We're not starting from scratch wherever we can. We're relying on existing definitions. So whether that's the definition of BIM from NIBs, BIM as a modeling process, a verb, BIM as a model, building information model, the digital representation, or BIM to use the M as management, the organization and the control of the data that is created through the process or that is stored in that model. So we're relying on those NIBs existing definitions as our starting point around what BIM means and BIM use cases. For digital twin, as Anil said, we are also relying on utilizing a somewhat industry-wide global agreed upon definition of digital twins, this virtual representation of real-world entities and processes synchronized at a specified frequency and fidelity. There's certainly much more to the definition than that, but to put in as few words as possible, that's what we're starting with as a definition. And myself and others in the DTIS are also involved with the Digital Twin Consortium AECO committee. And then as far as BIM being recognizing it's a combination of proprietary software and open BIM efforts, we're also working with Building Smart International, who they have a definition of open BIM. I don't need to read that, but I know myself and others are active with Building Smart either America or Building Smart International. In addition to the documents, the processes, the guidelines that we are working on, creating some consistency and agreed upon understanding, we also recognize that other organizations certainly are working on this same effort. Clearly, the Digital Twin Consortium, by their name, by their efforts, are trying to come up with standard understanding, use cases, definitions of digital twins. So I recently was at the Digital Twin Q1 meeting. My company is a member of it, so that gives me budget to go to those meetings. But just by means of my interest in the topic, I'm trying to stay as active as I can be with that organization. Building Smart as well, they just held their summit, and they actually have a digital twin working group, which developed a really good white paper about 2 years ago. That working group is about to reorganize and spin back up. So I know myself and others will be involved with that effort. And just over the last month or so, the Digital Twin Integration Subcommittee has been around for about 8 weeks now. And right around the middle of that, we had a presentation that we gave to the National Academy of Sciences, who also have a digital twin effort. ISO, who's involved with digital twin, involved with Building Smart and other organizations, they also are looking into the definition of digital twin, where it might make sense to create some international standards. So in addition to the document, we're also working with organizations.
So one of the reasons why this slide is here is I attended the AEC Integration Summit, put on by the CPC in Denver, actually led by our fearless leader there, Jeff Sample. As I told you before, I am involved in a supply chain value stream mapping effort and initiative for the electrical industry from a supply side to where we can help digitize the supply side to be able to help us evolve, if you will, the overall supply chain that is highly undigitized, if you will. And so in doing that, we mapped out in the couple days all the different stakeholders, going from the architect, design engineer, to the general contractor, to the trade contractor, and it was pretty clear. It was a great exercise, and I think we were the second year, building on the momentum that Jeff and the group did in the first year, and it just identified these just large gaps of data pools that don't exist. I'll just give you one example, like when a design engineer is designing, whether it's on the mechanical side or on the electrical side, when the design engineer is essentially making the design and the specification, and they're actually looking at equipment, they is one thing that they do based on understanding whether the equipment is still available or not discontinued, or if there is a major supply chain shortage, they just call their friends or people that they know, their distributors or people networks that they have, and they just get a gut feel for the availability of the product, for the if the product is still available and still being supported and not discontinued. It's a very manual process. There's nothing that I know of for a design engineer to go into a database to understand, to understand the product, to understand the supply chain regarding the product, and all the different design elements based on the availability. And we just thought it was obviously it was a enlightening exercise of taking a look at all the different stakeholders and the exchange of information and the database of information that is just not available. Obviously, BIM or digital twin, or BIM, is the could be the panacea that we're looking for, where all this would be available. But so anyway, by doing that, that's where I introduced David Oldfather to Nathan Wood, because they are actually a fantastic example of an actual industry coming together to solve a problem based on a common data exchange. They're a fantastic success story. I was extremely impressed with it. But on the contractor side, on the design side, on the architecture side, they are kind of a well-kept secret. On the distributor side and the manufacturer side, obviously they're very well known. The organization that he runs and that they created over a couple of decades. So this was a great opportunity for us to introduce David Oldfather, to what he's doing from a case study, if you will. So without further ado.
Thank you, Tim. David, if you can please walk us through your presentation.
Yes, if you'll move. Okay, so quickly, there'll be 3 presenters today to go quickly through where we're at. We were created in 1998 by 3 entities, NAD, which is National Association of Electrical Distributors, NEMA, you can read, National Electrical, and National Electrical Manufacturer Rep Association. We're owned by 2 of the 3 entities, 50% by NAD, 50% by NEMA, and we were founded so that we would serve as a single focal point for the exchange of data. At that time, predominantly transactional, but now it has expanded to product content, enhanced product content. We have 2 businesses. We're an ID exchange, EDI, you can see electronic data interchange. Here we do everything from serve as a van to offer managed services, which is setting up mailboxes, monitoring mailboxes, doing all the mapping necessary so that data can be exchanged in EDI format. On the connector side, we're a PIM, and it says MDM. John Callan will argue that it's a PIM. But in any event, we serve as the standards body. It's interesting, I say electrical industry, standards body certainly for manufacturers and distributors in the electrical industry, secondarily to reps who also use our system. We try to make it easy for manufacturers to load and syndicate not only their transactional, but their product content, and then make it easier for distributors, but it's also trading partners to extract and utilize that content without having to manipulate it. To that end, we obviously increase quantity of the SKUs and all the associated attributes. We improve the quality of the data, and we want to add value to that data. So we bring in third parties, either best in class or state-of-the-art third parties that can add value to the core competency that we offer, which is increasing the quantity and quality of that data. Idea that we have 3 million electrical products currently, well over 3 million now. We have 220,000 videos. You can see we have 360-degree images. We have 3.8, almost 4 million images. 5 billion attributes are downloaded annually, and 2 million are processed weekly. Here's a sample of some of our customers. So we own about, as an association entity, we own about 95% of the manufacturers in the electrical space. And then you can see we have some large Wesco and Sonepar and Rexel distributors as well, Graybar. Next. This one I'm going to pass to Matt Scarborough. This is in answer to what Tim was talking about for architects and engineers that don't know what's still available. So Matt, if you would take it from here.
Sure, thank you, David. And once again, my name is Matt Scarborough and the company's Trade Tech. The product that we're talking about today, Order Track. I've listened to a number of you talk about the difficulty it is. I think, Tim, you just mentioned the difficulty it is to understand the, is a product available or not? Well, in the world that I've lived in for 35 years, I was a manufacturer's rep for the majority of that. And to this day, that division, if I can call it, hasn't really changed. So about 6 or 7 years ago, I took out of that experience and started writing software for the rep business. About a year and a half ago, I realized, okay, there's more than just the rep needs the information. So the order track really is taken all the way from the architect to engineer, contractor, manufacturer's rep, distributor, and manufacturer, all together in one location so they can share data. So Order Track, by virtue of its name, was originally designed for one of those entities after they've placed an order with the manufacturer to say, where is my stuff? The process that works today, and we could talk about this in depth, but really it's all manual. You know, for the most part, it's an email is probably the only basics of electronics in the equation. An email gets sent to somebody and then you wait for somebody to check and get back to you. Well, Order Track is designed to connect to all of those entities together. So when a contractor is looking to say, where's my stuff, they can easily go into Order Track and access multiple manufacturers at the same time to find that order. So that's the theory of what Order Track is designed around. What we've done with the relationship that we have with IDEA is to also use the product that David just talked about, the connector, and create submittal packages and the other things that all the entities require prior to an order. So that's kind of the big picture of what Order Track is. We're trying to connect to all of the different company types together to share the data that everybody needs to make their business successful. From, you know, is it available, to how's it work, how's it look, and how can it fit into my project? So that's, you know, the 10,000 foot level. So thank you, David.
Now I'm going to pass it off to John Callan to go through our BIM initiative as it stands.
Thanks, David. So most of you probably already read this slide by now. So I'm not going to read the slide to you. I'm going to talk about what the slide is talking about. Lutron's a manufacturer, and as part of our business, we make BIM objects available for our products. There were numerous reasons why this was necessary. There's a requirement that on project handoff, an as-built project file, BIM project file, be provided to the building owner, but getting your BIM object adopted or used early on in the design cycle had a number of problems. And the biggest problem was inconsistency of attributes. NEMA initiated a study to try and understand how they could make BIM object adoption more universal. And they recognized that inconsistency of attributes was one of the major problems that really complicated people using manufacturer-specific BIM objects. Because of the inconsistency of the attributes, a lot of the specifiers would build their own generic versions with their own specific attributes and call it a day. And they weren't making use of the manufacturer-specific attributes or the manufacturer-specific supplied BIM objects. NEMA said, well, the solution to this is easy. We represent the electrical industry. Why don't we identify and establish a data dictionary of standard attributes for electrical products? And that's exactly what they did. And they announced this to the community at large. And one of the headaches that they were challenged by was manufacturers didn't want to introduce yet another data population exercise to populate these standard attributes in the BIM objects. Well, as a manufacturer, we already are providing substantial amount of product information to the IDEA connector. The IDEA connector for us is a syndication hub that we use to communicate all of our product content out to our distribution partners, all of our electrical wholesalers, electrical distributors, but we also use the connector to syndicate out to secondary data portals like Trade Service, Lights America. And so we came up with a plan that said, why don't we re-roll the information that we're putting into the connector to feed the data attributes in these BIM objects? And we formed a project that is essentially moving forward in this direction to leverage the data that is being provided by manufacturers into the connector to populate the templates for these BIM families to be able to reduce the redundant data entry and have universal consistency for all the data that manufacturers are providing.
Thank you, John. I think we'll
questions now, or are we still working through?
Well, I think we'll let Kelly speak, and then my
sorry.
goal is to remove the slides and have a discussion. Kelly, over to you.
Thanks, Anil. I think, you know, like Nathan had mentioned before, that my slide is in there basically to make sure that we have a chance to discuss, you know, the different perspectives on this. And I'm sure Mark has some great questions too, as to others. I think, you know, IDEA has some good concepts here. My first question that comes to mind as I see this is, how are contractors going to utilize this data any differently or in a way that's more helpful to us than we could have when, say, Kobe came out with a similar process, or others who have attempted to do the same thing? What's the benefit here to IDEA that makes it be different?
There's multiple touch points for this data, Kelly. So for example, I mentioned the fact that manufacturers upload data to the connector. We also use it to syndicate to secondary syndication services. One of those data paths actually goes out to Tracer, one of the estimating and quoting systems that ECs use on a regular basis. But the key thing there is that it's all the same source. So from my perspective, I don't want multiple representations of our products out in the industry. And so if we have a way to upload and disseminate our product data consistently across all touch points, and the attributes inside a BIM object are one of those touch points, then I see that as a huge win for us.
Well, I think that's a great point. However, unifying the, let's call them parameters, since we are specifically talking about Revit here, unifying the parameters that the manufacturers are using in Revit is great, but that doesn't provide any benefit to the contractors placing them in their model if the contractors aren't also using the same parameters.
I think the NEMA proposal is to establish that attribute dictionary that they've published, which are the standard electrical attributes as defined by NEMA, would essentially be recommended as the standard attributes for the electrical industry, including electrical contractors.
And has NEMA partnered with NECA to make sure that the data that's needed by both contractors and manufacturers is covered?
At this point, as I understand it, it's a solely NEMA activity that is getting socialized throughout the entire supply chain.
So Kelly, let me jump in. That's where Tim's effort between NAD, NEMA, NECA, and NEMRA is seminal, because up to this point, we have, to your point that you're driving pretty well, we've served distributors and manufacturers. The idea is, okay, can we also meaningfully extend this down to contractors, architects, engineers, property managers, property owners? So we're in the beginning of that discussion, but if we can modify or include what you would need, we are open to doing so and would embrace the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I hope Marc has shared a very. Marc has a good comment in the chat box, and I was also going to raise that. So if one subdomain, in this case, the electrical manufacturers, provide a agreed standard for product attributes, will that fit into the overall schema of other subdomains providing a similar standard? For example, there is the Building Smart International has what's called the Building Smart Data Dictionary, in which you can submit your classification system and your product attributes, and it can be served up for use by any other domain if there are any connections between these domains, so that we have a mapped up, connected, and well-governed overall schema or data dictionary for our sector. Do you have any plans of considering pulling into BSDD?
John, you want to take a crack at that first?
Well, I think much like David's earlier comment about expanding out beyond NEMA, NAD into NECA and other professional organizations, I would expect that the data dictionary that the NEMA BIM attribute standard has defined would certainly be offered up for consideration with BSDD.
Okay. Excellent. So I think at this stage, I'm going to open up the floor and see if anyone else has any comments or questions for Marc, Kelly, David, and his team, and anything else you want to contribute to this discussion.
Mike, this is Marcus. I couldn't find how to raise my hand. I'm just going to jump in. My question is for David and the folks. I threw out that question about BSDD, and that answer at the end there, I'm sorry, was just a little vague. I mean, how far along is the standard, and before you get all the way down a path to getting some, industry approval, let's just say that your standard is the right one for the properties and characteristics and allowed values, please do connect with Building Smart. They might already have gone down this path, or they might be seeking these attributes for these properties because they haven't conquered yet the electrical trade. So I would just strongly encourage a conversation before two horses keep racing when only one is needed.
Mark, I would hardly characterize where we're at as racing. But your point is well taken. And one of the reasons why I believe that Tim invited us to present today is we are at this stage where we are open. We want to be as inclusive through the channel as we can be. So we're sharing what we're doing and where we're at and where we're headed, and are open to modification and redirection. So we'll definitely take you up and pursue, make sure that we're in alignment, or at least see where we are.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think another consideration too is, you know, we have ISO 19650, which also covers, you know, the standardization of data in general, and it does reach into how we name certain things. And, you know, have you guys taken the time to look at aligning with that?
Yeah, I think, Kelly, that's an important point. I'll give you an example. We have, as RICS, we are a not-for-profit entity. We produce what's called the standard method of measurement, and also produce what we have called the NRM new rules of measurement, and we have an international cost classification system that we produce, but they're not connected. They're not connected to domains, other subdomains, and that's really the challenge. So I think I saw some comment come through, we don't need more standards. We have lots of standards. I totally agree. We need to be able to now connect these standards together, and BSDD is one mechanism because it does provide, I'm going to share one of the slides in which I think the solution to connecting these standards already exists. It's a matter of now entities who are setting standards to work together and map these standards. We don't need new standards, and I guess one of the comments I saw in the chat. Do you all agree? Is there anyone else who'd like to comment on that?
I would like to just ask the question, is there a forum, or is there a place or that you know of that where all these standards and the people that represent the standards and the people that they gather together? I mean, I know that's the goal of the Construction Progress Coalition, certainly, but it'd be interesting to see if we could identify all the standards that are in this quote unquote race, right? Or at least sandbox. And one, is it exhaustive? Are there any other standards out there that we don't know of? And is there any point where any place, any event, any conference, any entity, or could the Construction Progress Coalition be that entity where we come together?
I think that's an excellent point. And I do agree that this is one of those coalitions where this discussion can take place, but Mark is going to jump in and say Rome was the best place to be at, because that's where the Building Smart International Conference just took place. And that's where they are discussing these subdomains and how all these subdomains can be connected to each other. Maybe this is the time I can just quickly share with you what exists in terms of framework. This is an example. So now one of the hottest things right now all of us are talking about is the climate crisis and how decarbonization is becoming important. So one of the information sources from products that you need is EPDs, or environmental product declarations, which are like food labels, which give you carbon intensity per declared unit, like concrete, 1 cubic yard, 1 cubic meter, what's the global warming potential or carbon emissions. So we need with those products an EPD. But if these EPDs are not digital, they're not machine readable, then it's going to end up in the same situation. So currently, through ISO standards, and Kelli mentioned ISO 19650, which sort of becomes the base for this information management principles. But you have Building Smart International, which is working using these standards. So on one side, you have the ISO 12006 series that sets up the construction information classification tables and data models. Then recently released ISO 23386 and 87 provide product data templates and interconnected data dictionaries based on which BSDD has been developed. So essentially, they give you a framework on how products and their attributes, their values should be designed in an agreed, standardized way. So they produce what's called data templates. And they think that's what you guys are also, IDEA is trying to do as well. And more recently, they have come up with the ISO 22057, which is data templates for EPDs in the BIM environment. So if you have an object which needs to have its carbon emissions, intensities, and GWP information, what's the standard data template that we should all utilize so that it becomes interoperable and it's machine readable so that EPDs can be used in a BIM and CDE kind of environment. So I think the framework for this governance exists. It's a matter of us all, including our organization, RICS, agreeing to fit into this framework. So if we have cost-related information about products and objects, construction objects, if we produce a standard, it should fit into this framework. So I think from there, hopefully down the road, all standards would be mapped and they'll be sort of plug and play through BSDD. That was the last slide, but I was, I guess, too excited to share it. I did. Does that bring any thoughts?
Yeah, Anil, I have a question. Is ISO driving that framework that you just put up? Is ISO the one driving that, or is there organization behind ISO?
So ISO produces the standard, and then organizations like ours, like IDEA, they need to pick up those and agree and sign up to that governance model, saying that our product data templates are going to follow the rules, and these rules are actually very simple on how property sets, values, attributes are all defined.
Yeah, I don't get the impression that ISO drives many things. It's more that industry organizations go to ISO seeking the seal of approval, proving that there is, quality in the effort to create the standard, industry adoption, and seeking that standard more so than ISO themselves driving anything.
Well, and Tim, you know high level how UL standards work, UL listings and fire rating and stuff like that. Same idea, right? Like you still need to do all the work to submit the engineering judgments and all that sort of stuff, and they just kind of stamp the approval on it. So they exist as a body, but yeah, for BIM stuff, ISO doesn't push it. Building Smart International pushes it, and they push it through. I mean, that's my understanding. And correct me, those that are closer to it, if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
The ISO is a purely standard setting body. They're happy to produce standards and publish them and sell them.
Also means we could very much push things to them and push standards if we had the resources and the need, and there wasn't another body that was interested. But I feel like there are so many bodies, standards bodies out there that are interested and just are, sometimes doing them in silos or doing them slowly because they struggle to get resources. The more we can pool our resources, I think we can rise those tides together.
So maybe this is the question I want to pose to those who haven't been able to share their views. Are digital twins that lever that can help us map standards together? Is the decarbonization targets going to help us also ensure that we adhere to these data standards and governance models?
I don't think it's a solution. I think it's the byproduct of the solution, but I'll let others chime in.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there also like that, but I'll wait.
Yeah, like you have to do the other thing, you have to do the work to get the benefit of the digital twin. Like it doesn't solve the problem.
I think we would all like to say that, you know, in a wonderful altruistic world, decarbonization is going to drive a whole bunch of things, but let's be pragmatic here. What drives the work of construction is a dollars game. And so, you know, decarbonization will create commercial incentives in a project. It will create, you know, reasons for a project to be designed the way it's designed, or to use the materials that it's going to use. But at the end of the day, I think we've got to look at this from a commercial point of view. Standards will come out of initiatives that save contractors money, because contractors then will be able to bid something for a little bit lower price to win the work, savings passed up on the line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can't ignore capitalism. So I think we have to, so digital twins are super cool. They're great, but they need to be useful to a contractor for them to drive change. Kelly hit on a really important point there. All the standards, all the types of attributes, all the rules we want to make for attributes are great, but as soon as she has to recreate a piece of content every time a new attribute, every time a new property shows up, she's going to think real hard about doing it because that's an awful lot of work. So we've got to find some ways to make this matter commercially to the contractors. It's either got to make it easier to buy something, it's got to make it easier to model, it's got to make it easier to build, got to result in a higher quality product. We have to find some connection to those things that have dollar signs on them.
Well, and that's why I love David's. Then we're about 15 minutes left, and I don't know if you've gone through David's last two use case examples, because I think there's some really interesting value proposition there of measurement and competition and how we can actually use data to our advantage. So if we haven't gone through that, that's probably worth taking the last two. But if there's other thoughts, definitely, I don't want to stall the discussion, but I know there are a couple good slides there that are worth going over. Yeah, you can keep going back.
While we're moving to that, one of our initiatives that didn't make the presentation is we're in the process of developing a harmonized data model. Now it's around syndication formats, but anyone that is syndicating data recognizes that there are differing formats throughout the world. And what we're in the process of doing is evolving the connector to be able to take one format and transform it into another, so that distributors, manufacturers, reps, etc., can pick one syndication format and know that when they upload their data in the connector, whatever the trading partner requires, we can transform it and they can pull it out. There is no reason, though it'd be a lot of work, to look at the various standard BIM standards and figure out a way that we can harmonize them to make it to the point I think that was being just made. It is efficient and cost effective, and everyone can use it. So that's where we're headed. This one, so you know what we're doing, we have manufacturers, distributors, we have reps that are very interested in knowing, how does my data compare not only to what I believe I'm syndicating and what my distributors are posting on their e-commerce sites, but also what is the quality of that data? In other words, are my product titles, do they include brand? Do they include specifics that you need? Are my descriptions complete enough so that keywords can grab the appropriate part? So what we've done is we've linked ourselves with a third party that enabled us to use our data as a master file, compare it to what their master files have, and then compare it to what's actually being posted on an e-commerce site, so that we can begin to improve the quality of what a distributor is able to post on their site. That's what this particular, it's kind of a quality report on the e-commerce product. And you can see there are many more fields that we cover. Here, we're just talking about title, description, what are the features, the bullets, and how many images are available. Do they have videos? Do they have 360s? Is there enhanced usage, such as customer reviews and that kind of thing. I think you need to go back a slide if we're going to talk about volumetrics. All of this.
We can pause there if there's thoughts on that. Yeah, I gotta imagine someone's got thoughts on the gamification side or just.
Oh, sorry. I'll be quiet for a second.
Or if not.
Yeah, David, I'm going to jump in here. I've been involved in the building product manufacturer space going back to the earliest days of CAD, and it's kind of been a sort of a common thread through my career as I've touched on other things. You know, the idea of creating CAD details, creating BIM content, so that product gets specified, you know, more easily. That's going to lead to their product sticking in the spec is a message that I've beaten on manufacturers over the years. I don't know if it's ever stuck, and there's a number of companies who still use that as their selling proposition to get manufacturers into their particular library. I guess I'm going to ask, what are the barriers to this being successful? What are the real challenges that exist? Because a lot of it, this is sort of like that, you know, you could sell, you know, one roll of toilet paper to a country with 1 billion people and turn yourself into a millionaire. But, you know, there's issues to just, you know, a mass great gamification kind of business plan. I'm you know, a devil's advocate here, because I have, like I said, for 30 years been trying to get manufacturers to be consistent, to get on board, to seize the day and be, you know, delivering better content because it's just going to benefit the whole industry. And I haven't seen it happen.
Well,
Can we put you on the spot?
no, it's not. It's so for 20 years. So if you go back in '98, we took kind of the shortcut. We didn't insist on quality. We just wanted the content. Now we've changed our approach. We're saying, look, we know that manufacturers have spent money developing their content. They've got multiple business units, not just PIMs, but they've got ERPs that handle data in certain ways. So we've got to be flexible enough. We got to be able to take in what they're giving us, but showing them what a best practice really looks like. Because as we demonstrate what a best practice looks like, and we tie, again, this is to Graham's point, we tie dollars to if you'll put your data in this way, we can show you that you'll improve your revenue and reduce your expenses. We're going to get movement. So we're not looking to force anyone to do anything. We'll take the data the way it comes, but we're now going to start educating our manufacturer distributors and reps on what it ought to look like.
So I'd like to jump in on Mark's point there a little bit from a manufacturer's perspective. From a manufacturer's perspective, the greatest threat is the commoditization of our products. And anybody who's done any type of content program knows that the biggest hurdle to overcome is the standardization of the attributes, because as soon as you do that, then you commoditize the objects and put them all on a level playing field. Well, fast forward to where we are today, digitalization is something we're not going to escape from. It's the name of the game. It's what's happening. It's what feeds the industry and the marketplace. And so what manufacturers need to do is not only present their products in a standardized fashion, but also be able to do it in such a way that they can also differentiate their products. And so that's the real challenge that we have when we deal with syndicating our products out to the marketplace. We want to have our products searchable, findable, using standardized attributes, while at the same time have the ability to be able to call out and differentiate why our products are the products that people want to use. And that's the game. That's what we've been faced with ever since there's ever been a Material Express or some sort of content products system.
I see Kelly. Kelly, please.
I'm just curious because NEMA, you guys focus a lot on working with your manufacturers, working with the distributors, and understanding the needs of each other. But the end goal is to get the contractors to purchase and install these, and to get the clients to purchase and install these. And how much time is spent talking to us about what we need?
Well, that's why
Because you guys have done an awful lot of work to just now start talking to us.
Well, I agree with you, which is why there's been regime change here at IDEA and why we are reaching out and saying, you know what? We need to reach out to our ultimate customers and we need to reach out through the supply chain. Hence, here's an opportunity to actually start the discussion that should have taken place a long time ago.
Sure.
Well, and I think, Kelly, in a lot of ways, we've relied on our distributors to represent the needs of their customers, i.e. the ECs.
Sure. And John, I think, you make a good point that yes, nobody wants their product to be commoditized, right? You want yours to stand out, but here's the thing. The data, the BIM, that's not the way that you're going to stand out, and it never would be. And people that you interact with that work with the data have been able to tell you guys that for decades. And we're still telling you guys the same thing. And I'm glad that we're listening now. And we can finally start having that conversation, because that's where it becomes important, because we still have manufacturers and distributors and organizations that are talking about content. I don't want your content. I just want the data. And, listening to what is actually needed is what's really going to make the difference. And understanding why it's what we want is what's really going to make the difference.
I think Tim wants to come in next. I see that Graham has made an excellent point. NECA, MCA, SMAC, now all those folks got to be on the table to discuss these and we say the same thing through our members who are quantity surveyors or cost managers. We just given BIM models without knowing what the cost manager needs. I think that situation repeats itself over and over again. Tim.
Yeah, I think, Kelly, being the person now responsible for just facilitating for the first time ever, NEMA, NAD, NEMRA, and NECA. This is the first time all four in the electrical industry, this is the first time that all four associations and their leadership have come together to solve a problem. First time. And it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, David, when NEMA and NAD came in for the concept of IDEA, that was started in 1990, right?
98.
1998. You really had a true product, a true, really, let's say commercialized available product ready to go when? Roughly.
2001, 2002.
Right. And then when did you start providing versus content, just content, to now this quality thing, right? Where you're doing benchmarks and scorecards and things like that. When was that launched?
That came with the IDW, which was replaced by the IDEA connector, but we've just re-engaged data quality. So I'd hate to admit it, but call it end of 2022.
And so, Kelly, the reason why I bring up this point a long way to make a short point, that's just for e-commerce. Just for e-commerce, just for being able to shop, shop online, right? And to be able to provide the same assets that you usually did manually or in person at brick and mortar. I think when consortiums get together and when associations together work, the process is slow. It's just slow. The nice thing, for the first time, NECA, because of a regime change, has decided as a contractor association, we need to drive the value that we deliver as an association to help deliver business value to our members versus just networking value to the members and labor relations, right? So it's been slow. It definitely has been slow, but I think for the first time, you're saying we just started at the end of last year, really. But the one thing I will say, I think David has an interesting framework, because remember, he's got all this content. He's got all this content, and he showed, you know, pictures, right? All these videos and pictures and 360 shots. Well, couldn't you just add a standardized object to that as well? And it could become a marketplace for manufacturers to offer their BIM objects.
We do.
So I'm gonna stop you guys right there. This already shows that you didn't listen to what I said. We don't want you BIM objects. I don't care about a 360 view. I want data.
What data?
I do not want BIM objects. We had actually at, not this past year's, but the year before Summit, we specifically talked, and all the trade contractors, we specifically talked about how for decades, everybody's been making these BIM objects, and they're a complete waste of time because all we do is recreate them. I don't want your objects. I want the data.
And what
data?
What data?
I want the data that's used to make the objects. I want the actual geometry points. I want the points if it's electrical. I want information about the power that I need for it, the voltage, the amperage, the wattage, the busing, whatever it is. If it's plumbing, I want the flow. If it's ductwork, I also want airflow instead of water flow. Things. I want the data that I need about it to make it into a BIM object, because my modeling is going to be different than somebody else's modeling, regardless of any standards and regardless of the data. That part is never going to be universally standardized, but the data can be, and I can take that data from a database or a spreadsheet and push it into my modeling environment. And if you give me that, then I will want that. That's the place where you can differentiate yourself, is give me good data that I can use. Stop giving me a BIM object that you guys spent tens of thousands of dollars on that I don't give two shits about.
Kelly, before we go too far down.
We have 58 seconds left, so I'm going to, please, if you don't mind, let Graham and then Nick come in before we have to head back to our main discussion.
Yeah, so I'll ask one question or make a statement. Nobody ever bought a transformer because they liked the BIM model. There's never been an electrician out there saying, I'm going to pick this light bulb because they really like the RFA for this light switch. I think the other issue here is we've got to think about digital twins. Again, to Kelly's point, we've got to think of digital twins as data, not graphics. And when we start wrapping our head around the data, the graphics will follow.
So all of the data that we have in the connector, we do have the data points that you just went through, Kelly. The one thing that I recognize is when finally someone listens to what the contractors want. The first thing that, if I were a contractor, I would say is, what has taken you so damn long to start listening to what we need? And that's what I'm hearing from you today. Fair. Let's get past that, if we could, and start talking about, what do you need? What can I give you? And what do I need to prepare to give you to support your business?
Absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you. I think, Nick, you have last
everyone
3
left.
seconds.
It's totally fine. No, well, I was going to hammer home, I think, as the architect in the room, that a lot of the design stuff and the object stuff is probably coming from our end of the fence. And
I think we had a fantastic discussion. The term digital twin, all other things were left aside. I think the focus was on data, which we all agreed. I think that's how we wanted to seed this discussion. I think it's really all about data. And if it's all about data, we probably do not need new data standards. We just need a governance model which can help us interconnect these schemas and make them more relevant to downstream players in the supply chain. So right now, I think it's done much upstream or in silos without listening to the business requirement of contractors, subcontractors, trade partners, and so on. So I think that came out very, very clearly in our discussion. So we need an industry-wide push to make it happen. But I think Graham kept bringing this back home, saying commercial still drives most of these initiatives. If there are no savings, if there are no direct benefits that flow out of what we are doing, perhaps traction within the industry will not happen. But lastly, means I was going to say something about that. There's an article we wrote in the UK talking about cheapness rules. How long our industry is going to use the lowest cost model? When are we going to shift to a life cycle costing approach, especially if we talk digital twins, we talk about embodied carbon and operational carbon. You got to look at the entire life cycle. So, and that may shift some of the levers we need to pull in order to make data standards and mapping of these data standards possible. So I hope all that made sense. I personally enjoyed the opportunity to attend that session. I hope others did also. We had wonderful presentations. I'm sure you will all be able to see in the recording, and great exchange of ideas.
Awesome. Thank you, Neil. And yeah, I think I heard a lot of parallels as I was listening across the three different groups moving forward. And another group that I know was mentioned in your group and others is National Institute of Building Sciences, NIBS, and we joined up with them last year, thanks to Rachel and other folks over on that side. And so we did want to announce that they have now released the report that came out from that workshop that we did back in June of last year around that intersection of BIM and cybersecurity. I was blown away at, or I think just intrigued by the amount of value propositions and kind of those value statements that we can come up with when you use the risk of cybersecurity threats as actually a motivator to create the right adoption. So there's some interesting ways that we don't necessarily have to just follow the money. We can just follow the threats as a way to get standards and other things adopted. So was some great discussion, some good stuff you can read in there, and hopefully we'll be putting those links as we go along in the chat. Another update for those that may have not been on in the last couple of calls, we've been following very closely with obviously the talent retention challenges in this industry and getting to the root cause of them. Partnered with a few folks, NAWIC and YOPS and Brick and Mortar Ventures to fund this great survey last year that Pulsely did. Came up with some great data, some great insights that really just force us to look in the mirror at where unconscious bias impacts our ability to recruit good talent and how we're losing good talent and what we can do as leadership to move that forward. So a small update, there are a couple more assets. There's a great webinar recording that Sasha Reed led that you can now get to the website there and listen to that recording, as well as a Forbes article. So again, trying to increase that awareness around the root causes, change that culture from the ground up, and continue that conversation to normalize these newer topics.